Okay. Yeah. I told you. I'm going to try a more clickbaity sort of title. So, yeah. All right. Well, here goes the show then. Okay. Yes, it will be successful. Someday it will pay the rent. I know I quit my job to do this podcast thing. It's going to work out. All right? This title will totally save the podcast. Welcome to Idiot with a Library Card. Now, for the top 12 Baby Yoda memes on the internet this week. All right, she's gone. My wife thinks this isn't going anywhere and that I'm wasting my time. But I said that I would do something a bit more clickbaity. And, I mean, it is a top 12 list, but not the top 12 Baby Yoda memes. So, sorry about that. If you were looking forward to top 12 Baby Yoda memes, I'm sure you'll find it somewhere in the depth of the internet. We do something a little more serious here, in which we talk about Sherlock Holmes stories from 100 years ago that aren't that serious and are kind of silly and fun. So that's today on Idiot with a Library Card. I'm going to talk about the top 12 stories from the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Now, I shouldn't say that it's the top 12. I'm ranking the 12 stories in the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. It's a collection of short stories, 12 to be exact. I don't know how many times I can say 12. 12. So generally speaking, they go in this order. A Scandal in Bohemia, The RedHeaded League, A Case of Identity, The Boscombe Valley Mystery, The Five Orange Pips, The Man with the Twisted Lip, The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle, The Adventure of the Speckled Band, The Adventure of the Engineer's Thumb, The Adventure of the Noble Bachelor, The Adventure of the Burly Cornet, and The Adventure of the Copper Breeches. So I'll just say overview of those 12 stories together. I'm gonna rank them. The stories in this, the short stories, it's not like there's a good section or a bad section. I will say that probably between story 5 and 9 is like the strongest part, and I was really rolling when those stories were coming. So I'll go over each story. I ranked them, having a nice glass of Jameson, just relaxing. Christmas just happened, so Merry Christmas. And by the way, some of the stories have a nice Christmas theme. 2 in particular have a Christmassy theme, which is fun. So I'm going to go in order of the ones I like the least, and then the ones my favorite. I would say, again, just sort of overviewing it real quick, there are 3 I really didn't care for. There's probably 3 that I liked them, but there were some problems that really threw me off. And then there's 6 that I really do like, and as the list goes, I would say the top 5, 5 through 3 are really interchangeable, and it was hard for me to say this one was better than that one, but that's what you guys pay me for, to make those hard decisions. And then the top 2 I just loved. So I will start with number 12, and that's The Case of Identity. Now, I realize that my bottom 3 are all wedding-related stories, and I don't know what that says about me, but I can actually squeeze The Case of Identity and The Adventures of the Noble Bachelor together. They're both wedding stories in which one of the wedding party disappears. Not the whole party, but in A Case of Identity, the husband disappears. In The Noble Bachelor, the wife disappears. A Case of Identity is weird and Actually, it's not confusing. It's pretty straightforward, and it's one of those stories where they're not all like shocking twist endings. I think they try to be to a certain degree. Most mystery stories do. This one is one I figured out pretty quick as to who was doing it, who was tricking the bride, and why. And I'll also say my bottom 6 has a lot of non-crimes, and this is one where a bride is basically basically tricked into promising herself to someone, and then the person she promised herself to, it turns out not to be the person who they claim to be. And it's pretty obvious who they are, and it's boring. And the noble bachelor, the wife runs off with someone. It is so freaking stupidly obvious who she runs off with that the story, as soon as he's telling the story of what happens when the wife walks down the aisle, you're like, oh, that's who she ran off with. And again, it's another non-crime. And I noticed in my list that the non-crime stories are the ones I like the least. So I guess there's a difference between Sherlock Holmes solving a murder or a robbery or something exciting like that, and Sherlock Holmes solving domestic matters. There really is a difference. So those are my bottom two. I hated them. They were dumb and boring, and you could skip them when you read. Now they sort of appear in different places, but hey, if you want to read them, who knows? Maybe you disagree with my list. Some of the lists are some of the favorite stories are towards the bottom for me. And that brings me to the next one, which is A Scandal in Bohemia. It's one of the most famous Sherlock Holmes stories. It introduces Eileen Adler. She tends to show up in all the Sherlock Holmes adaptations. I mean, they do an adaptation of, most Sherlock Holmes do an adaptation of A Scandal in Bohemia, and Irene Adler always ends up being like Sherlock Holmes's love interest. Again, I still haven't watched the Robert Downey Jr. movies. I've seen bits and pieces of them, and they just seem so not Sherlock Holmes. They're like the dumb part of Sherlock Holmes that isn't my favorite. I mean, I like the action stuff, but it's just not. It just doesn't seem well done and very, very Sherlock Holmesy, other than like the time period, and the characters have the same name. But Eileen Adler is a disappointment. The story is blah. It's the longest one. It's what opened up the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. And when I read that first one, I went, oh, I like, as I said, with the novels like Study in Scarlet, I hated the first half and was very worried about this endeavor I was doing. I read this, and I was like, oh, no, the short stories are the ones I'm not going to like. But that changed with the second story, so we're all good. But that is number 10, is A Scandal in Bohemia. Number 9 is The Adventure of the Copper Beeches, or Breeches, Beeches. I think it's Beeches. It's one of the more interesting stories. Basically, a woman comes to Sherlock Holmes because she gets a weird job offer where she's supposed to be like a nanny, but she has to just do things like cut her hair and at certain points of the day sit with her back to a window. It's what it is. It's an interesting story. So some of the stories are really cool and they have twists at the end, and this one does. But there's something about the writing. It's the last story. So maybe it's me. Maybe I was just sort of done with the short stories for a little bit. I mean, I'm on another short story kick with Sherlock Holmes, reading the memoirs of Sherlock Holmes, but this one was bad. It was this again. It was one of those. The idea is really good, and then put in practice, it's to me one of the poor written. So it's one of the poor written short stories, and it didn't engage me. So I would say you could skip that one, but it's not terrible. And already now we're getting to stories I like some parts of them. So number 8 is the Biscombe Valley Mystery. What's good about this book? The backstory of the person that did the crime. And this one actually has a crime. There's a lot that have non-crimes, and I went over those, and I realized again that the least favorite of mine are Sherlock Holmes deals in a domestic matter mystery, and it's really boring. But not only do a lot of stories don't have crimes in this, there's no prosecution, and this is one of those where the murderer actually gets away with it for odd reasons, and the the figuring out the mystery, I knew right away. I knew immediately who killed the person, who killed the victim, and it's obviously not who gets arrested. It's fine. It was really predictable. And then what happened was they did the backstory, and the backstory is so cool for this one that I would say it's worth a read, and I would say that all of the other ones I'm going to go with are worth a read or a listen. They're all about an hour long to listen, so if you have like a half-hour commute, you can get one done in a day. Totally worth it. And then you can do them individually. You don't have to go through this whole short story. So the Biscombe Valley Mystery, worth a read. Number 7 is The Man with the Twisted Lip. The beginning is a lot of fun on this one. And again, we're in the not perfect stories. John Watson is chilling at home with his wife. His wife's friend shows up and says that her husband's basically been in the opium den for 2 days now. Usually he'll go, do a little opium and then come home that night, but he's been away too long. So John has to go pick him up. He goes to pick him up. He runs into Sherlock Holmes. And by the way, a lot of the things with this story is ever since John gets married, which happens at the end of the Sign of Four, ever since that happens, all these stories, a few of them happen right before he gets married. So the Sign of Four has happened, but, it'll be just right before I got married, I was still living in 221 Baker Street. But then a lot of the stories are just him going over there for a visit or checking in, or one of them was to say, basically Merry Christmas, and then something crazy happens. So, but this one, he doesn't go to 221 Baker Street. He goes to an opium den, which Sherlock Holmes is investigating. The story's good until the ending, and you start figuring it out. Although it does advertise that panhandling can be a profitable business. But you may want to look into this story. And sorry if you were looking for summaries. I mean, there are summaries on the internet if you want to read through it. I would say they're worth a read. Again, they're pretty short. Number 6 is The Adventure of the Barely Coronet. It's some sort of jewelry thing, and that's apparently obvious in the story. The thing that throws me off about this story is it's about this guy who works at a bank, and he lives at home with his ne'er-do-well son and his niece that he sort of adopts as a daughter. Some royalty type comes in, needs a quick loan for like £20,000. He gives him this jewelry thing to keep safe, and for some reason, he doesn't think it would be safe in the fucking bank he works at with the huge vault, so he takes it home and locks it in his piece of crap drawer that has a lock. And that right there, that's the biggest problem with the story. The rest is interesting and kind of fun, and it's Sherlock Holmes figuring stuff out. But for the most part, it is just this idiot working at a bank, and was worried the bank would get robbed, which is a weird thing if you worked at a bank. If you were constantly worried about the bank being robbed, I don't know. You'd be taking shit home all the time to hide it. So that's what he does. He takes this jewelry thing home, and then it gets stolen at home. No freaking duh, you dum-dum. So that's the weakest part of the story. The rest of the story is sort of a family drama, and it's interesting and fun. Again, I don't think there are any prosecutions there. The jewelry item gets stolen. I think I alluded to that. I don't think I'm spoiling anything there. You know it's going to get stolen when he gets it and goes, you know what? This huge bank vault seems safe, but I think I'm going to take it home so I can watch over it, or whatever stupid reason I have. So that's a weak one. The setup's weak, but the story's pretty good. And now we're already in the top 5. Number 5 is The Adventure of the Speckled Band. And honestly, this is where the stories get good. The next 5 I'm going to list, I would absolutely recommend find a way to read these, or listen to them, or even watch like a dramatic adaptation. There's a 1984 BBC series. It's free on YouTube. I don't know if it's legal on YouTube, but it's on YouTube. And they cover, I believe, all of these. I know they do the next one, but number 5 is The Adventures of the Speckled Band. The bad guy in it's great. And it's my favorite part. He's this rich guy who's crazy, and he has a bunch of gypsies on his lawn, and there's cheetahs and other wild animals sort of running around his property, which makes it fun because there's a little nighttime chase adventure, and you think maybe the cheetah's going to pop out and attack someone. You're kind of hoping so. The murder's really interesting. You have a feeling who the bad guy is almost immediately, and it's not that he did it, it's more how he did it. And so it's a good one. It's a good mystery, and it's interesting and fun and creepy. So number 4 is the RedHeaded League. It's great. The ridiculous hoops the criminals jump through to get this guy out of a pawn shop are funny and bizarre. Basically, they set up this fake trust in which some rich American businessman gives red-headed people in London X amount of money, and it's really just to get him out of his shop for another plan. You're introduced to a bad guy named John Clay, who is this rich aristocrat that just wants to do crimes for some reason. It's really good and a lot of fun. It's the second story, and I gotta say, I know A Scandal in Bohemia was low for me. I was really worried when I read it. I went, this is not going to be a fun little project. And then I read the RedHeaded League, and it got me right back and enthusiastic about this endeavor. And the RedHeaded League is a lot of fun. Again, I would really suggest just trying to get your hands on it. It's all over the place, and most of the Sherlock Holmes stuff is free. But it's so good and so much fun. And there's a little adventure. There's no chase, though. That's the only thing, is you think there might be like a chase or a shootout, and it doesn't end that way. It ends a bit anticlimactic. Number 3 is The Adventure of the Engineer's Thumb. Now, this is one of those where the Sherlock parts are kind of boring and not very exciting. And I understand it's really high on the list for a story like that with the problems. The great part about it is the victim, who is an engineer who gets his thumb cut off. I'm not spoiling that. It's pretty obvious from the word go. His little horror story that he says. He's like a hydraulic engineer, and he goes to fix a giant press, but he has to do it at night, and there's some shady stuff going on, but he's like young and trying to get his business going. Arthur Conan Doyle does this so well, is sets up these little side characters, and their motivations are usually very well established and understandable. This one is entertaining with the Sherlock Holmes stuff, but his story, the story he tells, the little horror story, and you know he's going to lose a thumb, but that's it. And there's a sort of Star Wars trash compactor scene too. It's really great. It's a lot of fun. And so I really liked it, and that's why it made it into my top 3. Number 2 is the 5 orange pips. And I believe pips are orange skins, basically. Okay, so this is the most violent of them. I believe of the ones I've mentioned, there's like 2 murders. The death toll in this is like 6 people die in these 12 short stories. Again, some of the stories are Sherlock Holmes intervenes on a domestic issue, and some of them are robberies that don't have deaths. And my favorite is a robbery that doesn't have a death. But we'll get to the 5 orange pips, in which 3 murders take place years apart. Here's what I like about it, and this is one I might spoil a little bit, but it comes up pretty quick, and when you figure it out, you know, I'm decently well read on history, so I knew in the Study in Scarlet that I knew immediately, like, oh crap, these people are going to be Mormon. This involves the KKK, and it's really interesting. It has a creepy sort of horror aspect to it, and it's really well done. It's a little scary. There's some cosmic justice in the end, and the KKK's in it. And you're just like, oh my god, that's so cool. Because the KKK are good bad guys. So you just, I don't know too many people who, I don't know too many people who are neutral on the KKK. I don't think I know anyone who likes the KKK. I don't know anyone who has ever said, nah, they're not so bad. Everyone hates the Ku Klux Klan. They're awful, and now I would say they're still awful, but I guess they were scary back then. Like they were a terrorist group, and like a serious terrorist group, like Hezbollah or the IRA, which are scary. And now they're more pathetic, but pathetic in such a way that they still are awful. And I hope they all die in sinking ships. Sorry, I gave the ending away to that one, but it's true. I hate the KKK, and it's not a very unpopular opinion. I think everyone hates the KKK, except for people who are members of the KKK, and I guess people KKK adjacent. But fuck those people. They don't listen to this podcast. And if you do, I don't need your downloads. And now we come to number 1, and it's The Adventure of the Blue Carbuncle. The only issue I have with the story is the beginning and how it comes to be in Sherlock Holmes' lap. But what it does the best, I think, is it shows off his skills. He starts by examining a hat. Basically, a cop comes by a scene of like what looks like an assault by some young ruffians on this old drunk guy, and he drops what he was carrying, which was a giant goose, and he dropped his hat. It starts off with Sherlock examining the hat and showing his art of deduction, which is fun, but you get that a lot. The rest of it is Sherlock Holmes on the beat. And what they do here, see, occasionally my problem with Sherlock Holmes stories is what they'll do occasionally is have him look at John and be like, well, I'll be back in an hour. And you're like, well, we kind of want to see what you're doing, Sherlock. Like, how are you doing this detecting? In this one, you go through all the steps he takes to find out what happened in this mystery. And it is terrific. It's really fun. It's very interesting. It's my favorite because I think it's one of the more grounded ones. Once you get past how the case falls in his lap, and it really does just fall in his lap. There's no prosecution at the end, like a lot of these, where they find the bad guy. In this one, he admits what he did, and there's an innocent guy accused of this crime. And when they find out who actually did it, he basically says, well, look, you'll have to come forward if this innocent guy looks like he's going to get prosecuted, but if we can return the stone, which we do, which is the blue carbuncle's a big gem. I didn't know what a carbuncle was, but now I do. And so there's no prosecution, but a lot of these stories are like that. What it does well is Sherlock Holmes' deduction. He uses the art of deduction. That's his main power. But his ability to sort of adapt to situations and get the information he needs to is really highlighted in the story. It's my favorite. I would suggest it's also the most Christmassy Sherlock Holmes. I'm putting this show out as I'm recording. It's 2 days after Christmas. I would suggest maybe, if you're in a Christmassy mystery mood, this was the best one. So maybe that's why I liked it so much. I was reading it around Christmas and thinking about Christmas a lot, but I love this story. It hits all the elements for me, minus a good bad guy. It does lack that. Some of the other stories have better villains, but this one doesn't need it. It has so many aspects that are really quality. It was my favorite. It might be my favorite Sherlock Holmes story I've read so far, because it works on so many levels, and it was a lot of fun. That is my list of the worst to best stories in the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I'd suggest picking it up. Even the bad ones might be worth a read, just to, if you want to get into Sherlock Holmes, which again, I've been very satisfied with picking up this project. So I've really enjoyed it, and I'm becoming more and more a fan of Sherlock Holmes. So thanks for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps the show. And please tune in next time. I think I'm going to keep doing Sherlock Holmes stories until there ain't no more to do. Thanks for listening.